Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I'm going to answer a question that I got in the Q&A thread that really kind of deserves its own video. It's just too detailed of a question to really waste trying to fit into 3 minutes. So I thought I would give it its entire video, and someone had asked me, hey, is it possible to run the conjugate method in a 3-day-a-week program, and how would someone even set that up? And I think that's a really good question. It's a really good question. In fact, I would say even the type of orc mode, max effort orc mode I'm doing, which is kind of a conjugate variant, could be done in 3 days. Now, we know 3 days isn't ideal. You really want 4. You really want 4. But could someone do it? Yes. And are there successful athletes who do it? And the answer is yes. There are a lot of field athlete and contact sport athletes who actually run the system that way. They run the system 3 days a week. So the question a lot of people say is, well, one, why? And two, does that mean they go to a full body or whatever? No. No, absolutely not. Well, you have bench press days and you have squat and deadlift days. All right? It's essentially an upper-lower, but I think where people get confused with the upper-lower, I run into this with clients when I throw rows into their deadlift accessory and stuff. They're like, that's lower body. Exactly. That's why splits can be stupid. Right, that's why the idea of a split can be problematic, is when you start saying, I can't do my upper back as a deadlift accessory. So really we need to think of these things as movement pattern oriented, not body part. Right? You don't want to think of it as a true upper lower, even though it is, because that means you would only pick one day to train your upper back and things like that. Well, upper back is something you could successfully, and many guys successfully train both days, because it's a deadlift accessory and it's a bench accessory. So if you're thinking in terms of bench press days, which are generally upper body days, and then squat and deadlift days, a lot of your back work could fall into both. So just kind of pointing out, this is not necessarily like people are thinking in terms of just upper lower. And if you go to 3 days, and let's say you take the basic template, which is exactly what field athletes do, and they spread it out further. Instead of trying to say, hey, let me stack everything into one day and try to make it some sort of full body where you bench, squat, deadlift, all this stuff. No, that's not going to work. It's absolutely not going to work. Well, at least for anyone who's past the novice phase. And we kind of also ask the question of, if a person is a novice, why are they trying to run full conjugate outside of a coach? Probably not a good idea either. Now, a coach can make it work. So these guys are doing it that way because they're doing so much sport-specific training, or they have very, very large amounts of conditioning work. So guys who are doing a lot of conditioning, a lot of GPP, sport-specific training, they can't always handle the full 4-day program. It interferes with their sport. It interferes with their sport. And you're still getting the muscles worked about every 4 days. So if you take the system like this because you have a lifestyle that prevents you from doing it 4 days a week, the conjugate, and that could be an extremely hectic work schedule, or a very, very physically demanding job. And an example of a demanding job isn't just people in a profession. It could be a football player. It could be an MMA fighter. That alone is just demanding. So that's a perfect example of someone who might need the 3 days. Someone who's got a job and does MMA on the side. Say they're not even a pro. Right? That person's going to struggle sometimes with the full 4-day template. So they need to spread it out. They need to spread it out. So the idea here would be having, let's say you have your max effort bench, and your max effort squat deadlift, your dynamic effort bench, and your dynamic effort squat deadlift type day. Okay? It's normally put into 4 days a week. You could spread it into 3, which just means you run into the next day. So week 1, you do max bench, max squat deadlift. Dynamic effort bench. Then the next week you start with the dynamic effort bench, or dynamic effort squat and deadlift. Then the second workout is max bench. The third workout of the week is max squat deadlift. Then you go to week 3 We're starting with the dynamic effort bench. You guys see what I'm doing here? Essentially, we're spreading out the template. We're just moving it one workout further. So instead of a Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, you do a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and you just move the last workout down a slot. Where the confusion is then people are thinking, well, wait a minute, every week is going to be totally different then. That's right. That's right. Every week is going to be totally different. And that's not complicated. It's no more complicated than doing 4 workouts in a week where you just replicate the same day each week because you're just spreading it out. It's literally the same thing. Okay, it's literally the same thing. So if you look at that over the course of, say, 4 weeks, over the course of 4 weeks, you're doing 12 workouts instead of 16. So basically, you're running the full system 3 times in 4 weeks instead of 4 times in 4 weeks. You're just spacing it out. Now, you're still getting really good muscle protein synthesis uptime. And now, if you're an athlete who's doing other stuff, aren't you getting conditioning and Metcon and stuff on the other days? Doesn't that carry over to resparking some of the muscle protein synthesis? Of course it does. Appropriate Metcon is mildly anabolic. It does have a mild training response for hypertrophy. Now the question we can get into, people say, well, is it going to produce maximum hypertrophy? No. But it could produce 80%, 90% of your maximum hypertrophy. And if you extrapolate that over a year, let's say over the course of a year, because you're not a novice lifter, you were going to gain 5 pounds of muscle. So what's 80% of that? 4 pounds of muscle? Is that really that bad? No, it's not. Is that a good compromise for someone who has a busy lifestyle or they have to have sport-specific training or a sport they compete in? No, it's perfectly reasonable. Perfectly reasonable. You can spread it out that way. And in fact, the point could be made that for a higher level athlete, that might be the best they could hope for. Because if you're doing all your sport-specific practice, you're out on the field for football, and you're doing all your conditioning work, or let's say you're doing BJJ, because I have a client who does BJJ. Let's say you're doing BJJ, and you can't recover from the training loads because you're practicing BJJ 3 times a week, and then you're doing conditioning work once or twice a week on top of it. You're going to be limited in your growth anyways. So realistically, if you get those 3 really good, high-quality sessions in that are an ideal stimulus for you as an athlete and for muscle growth, they're programmed correctly, isn't that the best you could hope for anyways? To gain 80% of your possible gains through the year because of interference from all the other activity is actually a phenomenal compromise. Because you weren't going to do better than that anyways. You can't burn the candle at both ends. There's got to be a compromise somewhere. So running a system like this because of your total workloads of everything else, or your lifestyle, maybe you have a 60-hour work week and a very, very, very high-stress job. Now, that being said, I have lifters in that environment who do conjugate 4 days a week, by the way, because they have sedentary jobs. Okay, they have desk jobs. Now, those guys do just fine. They do just fine. Because I have more than one. I have a couple of them, actually. And you know what? It works just fine for them. But maybe you have a really physically demanding, stressful job with a lot of hours. Okay, and well, in that case, you might have to do it like the athlete does and spread it to 3. I have a guy whose work season requires that. He runs that system, and during the busiest time of the year because of work, because his actual work is so busy and so demanding, he does 3. He makes gains. Makes gains. So people asking, can you do it? Yeah, absolutely. You just space it out. What you don't want to do is say, well, since I'm only going to do it 3 days a week, I'm just going to try to clump everything in and not program it correctly. No, you're just going to actually end up having an extra rest day every week is what's going to happen. You're going to have 4 rest days and 3 training days instead of 4 training days and 3 rest days. No, you just space it out. Because if your lifestyle is that demanding, or your other training is so demanding, that you can't work the full 4 conjugate workouts in every week and handle them and the assistance work, you are better off spreading it out and doing it like that anyways. You certainly don't want to clump them in even tighter just because you can only make it to the gym 3 days. No, that's not ideal. Not ideal at all. But it's totally doable. Alright guys, well that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.